10,916 meters beneath the waves, a steel sphere once touched the blackest depths of the Earth and survived. This was not science fiction, but the 1960 Trieste dive into the Mariana Trench, a human gamble against 1,000 times the pressure of the atmosphere above. Most submarines will never approach even half that depth. Some secret military machines have risked collapse for an edge in a shadowy ocean war. How deep is the deepest submarine? The answer is both a record and a riddle, because every meter further pushes the limits of metal, courage, and imagination. To understand why, you have to trace the journey from the first leaky submersibles to the iron-willed pioneers who dared to def the abyss. In the early days, the dream of slipping beneath the surface was met with wood, leather, and a lot of hope. Cornelius Drebbel's 17th-century craft, built for King James I, creaked through the Thames, sealed with greased leather and powered by oars. It barely dipped below the waterline, but proved that a vessel could survive, if only for a short while, under the weight of the river. The real breakthrough came with iron. By the mid-1800s, inventors like Wilhelm Bauer built the Brandtaucher, an iron shell fitted with primitive ballast tanks. Water flooded in to sink the sub, then was pumped out by hand to rise. A simple idea, but a revolution in controlling buoyancy. The hull had to be strong enough to resist collapse, yet light enough to float when needed. Every new design was a gamble. John Holland's submarines, adopted by the U.S. Navy at the turn of the 20th century, added electric motors and compressed air systems, making underwater travel longer and safer. Diesel engines soon replaced gasoline, letting subs recharge batteries while surfaced, then run silent and unseen below. Each step forward, iron over wood, ballast tanks over sealed chambers, diesel-electric power over hand-cranked gears, pushed the limits of depth and endurance. The ocean's pressure waited, unyielding, for the next bold attempt. On January 23, 1960, two men, Jacques Piccard and Don Walsh, sealed themselves inside a steel sphere barely large enough for their bodies, and began a descent no human had ever attempted. The bathyscaphe Trieste, suspended beneath a massive gasoline-filled float, crept downward into the darkness of the Mariana Trench. 4 hours and 47 minutes later, the pressure outside reached more than 1,000 times what we feel at sea level. A sharp crack echoed through the cabin as a window pane fractured, but the hull held. At 10,916 meters, Trieste touched the seafloor of Challenger Deep. For 20 minutes, Piccard and Walsh stared out into a world of silt and shadows, catching a glimpse of what looked like a flatfish moving across the mud, evidence that life could endure where no one expected. When Trieste surfaced, the rules of the deep had changed. The ocean's greatest depth was no longer off limits to human eyes. Just 4 years later, a smaller sub named Alvin began a different kind of journey. Built for science, Alvin wasn't chasing records. It was searching for answers. In 1977, Alvin's crew discovered hydrothermal vents 2.5 kilometers down, hot, mineral-rich springs teeming with life that fed not on sunlight, but on chemicals from the Earth's crust. In 1986, Alvin's cameras revealed the wreck of the Titanic, lying in silence nearly 4 kilometers beneath the Atlantic. Each dive rewrote what was possible, not just for engineering, but for our understanding of life itself. The deep was no longer a graveyard. It was a frontier, and the submersibles that reached it became the keys to its secrets. In the shadowed depths of the Norwegian Sea, a titanium leviathan prowled far below the reach of sunlight. The K-278 Komsomolets, a Soviet submarine launched in 1983, was built to survive where no other military vessel dared. Its inner hull, forged from BT-48T titanium alloy, formed a sealed pressure chamber over 7 meters wide, strong enough to withstand the force of a freight train pressing on every square inch. Soviet engineers claimed the Komsomolets could dive beyond 1,000 meters. In secret trials, it reached 1,080 meters, a depth that would crumple most steel hulls like paper. Yet for all its strength, the Komsomolets carried hidden vulnerabilities. On April 7, 1989, a fire broke out in the aft compartment, triggered by an electrical short. The blaze spread quickly, disabling propulsion and electrical systems. Emergency controls failed. The crew fought to surface, using backup ballast tanks and manual overrides. Smoke and heat forced them forward, while the stern became an inferno. Escape capsules, meant to be a last resort, proved too complex and time-consuming to deploy for most. As the sub lost power, the crew abandoned ship into freezing water, clinging to rafts and debris. Rescue ships arrived, but too late for many. 42 sailors died, most from hypothermia, trapped by the cold and the slow response. Titanium kept the wreck intact on the seafloor, but it could not save the men inside. Classified reports and survivor testimony revealed a pattern: dazzling engineering, but critical failures in emergency systems and rescue planning. The deepest diving military submarine became a cautionary tale, its secrets sealed by the same pressure it once defied. On March 26, 2012, a single green sub sliced into the Pacific, carrying only its pilot, James Cameron. The deep-sea Challenger was more spacecraft than submarine, its cockpit a cramped sphere barely wider than Cameron's shoulders. Outside, the hull braced against a pressure that could crush steel flat in seconds. Inside, Cameron monitored a wall of flickering screens and dials, alone in the dark for nearly 3 hours. This was the first solo descent to Challenger Deep, nearly 10,908 meters down. The world watched as Cameron, better known for film than engineering, became the first person to reach Earth's deepest point alone. The deep-sea Challenger owed its survival to a new kind of buoyancy: syntactic foam. Packed with millions of hollow glass microspheres, this material was both strong and light, allowing the sub to float back up from the abyss. The project nearly ended before it began. A fire in the Australian workshop destroyed months of work, and only a frantic rebuild saved the mission. Cameron and his team worked through setbacks and near failures, pushing the limits of what private funding and determination could achieve. Just 7 years later, the spotlight shifted to Victor Vescovo and the DSV limiting factor. Where Cameron's dive was a singular drama, Vescovo's sub was built for repetition. Its titanium hull, precision-forged and pressure-tested, carried Vescovo to Challenger Deep not once, but over a dozen times between 2019 and 2020, setting a new standard for reliability. Each dive reached depths up to 10,934 meters, with independent validation confirming the records. For the first time, the deepest trench on Earth became a place humans could visit again and again, not just a one-off victory. That's how the age of solo glory gave way to routine records, where vision, engineering, and persistence opened the ocean's last frontier to science and discovery. At the bottom of the ocean, pressure doesn't just increase, it multiplies. Every 10 meters adds another atmosphere until the weight above becomes almost unimaginable. At Challenger Deep, more than 10,900 meters down, the pressure reaches 1,100 bar, enough to crush a car into scrap metal in an instant. If Mount Everest stood on the seafloor here, its summit would still be buried under 2 kilometers of water. That's why every extra meter is a test of engineering. Hulls must be forged from titanium, not steel, to resist the relentless squeeze. Syntactic foam, packed with millions of microscopic glass spheres, keeps modern subs afloat, defying the crushing force that would shatter concrete like glass. The deeper a sub goes, the more every weld, every bolt, Every inch of material is pushed to its limit. At these depths, the ocean is not just cold and dark. It is an enemy, pressing in with a force that never lets up. Inside a sub at 10 kilometers down, the world shrinks to a cold, silent capsule. The cabin temperature hovers just above freezing, every breath carefully rationed by oxygen tanks and carbon dioxide scrubbers working overtime. There is no margin for error. A pinhole in the hull would mean instant death, the crushing pressure waiting just beyond a few centimeters of titanium. The silence is absolute, broken only by the low hum of life support systems and the faint creak of metal under strain. Outside, the abyss stretches on, unmapped and unknown. More than 80% of the ocean floor remains a blank space on our charts, hiding mountains, trenches, and life forms no one has seen. In the deep, time slows. Even the bravest minds feel the weight of isolation, the awareness that rescue is impossible. The frontier is not just physical, it's psychological. Every dive is a reminder that the ocean still holds secrets, and that human innovation is always chasing the unknown. In 1960, Trieste reached a depth of 10,916 meters in the Challenger Deep, setting a record that stood for over half a century. Since then, vessels like Deep Sea Challenger and Limiting Factor have confirmed that humans can repeatedly visit the ocean's deepest point. The Soviet K-278 Komsomolets, with a test depth exceeding 1,000 meters, remains the deepest diving military submarine ever built. But its true limits and much of its data are still classified. More than 80% of the ocean floor remains unmapped, and the full capabilities of some military submarines are undisclosed. What is clear is that each new descent demands stronger materials and greater precision. As of today, no submarine, military or civilian, has reached the bottom of the Mariana Trench beyond the documented dives. The pursuit of deeper exploration continues, driven by science, engineering, and the enduring mystery of the ocean's abyss.